Welcome everyone to WeCan's second in our Roundtable series. The series is on empowering community to become engaged with local governments and electing climate champions to local government councils. The title of this roundtable is Recruiting Climate Champions to Run for Council. My name's Dave Thompson. I'm one of the volunteers at WeCan on the local government team. I'm also a consultant with PolicyLink Research Canada and a climate-focused candidate in the Victoria 2022 election. So WeCan stands for West Coast Climate Action Network, and I will paste a link to the network's website into the chat after I stop talking. WeCan works to serve, support, amplify, and promote the multitude of climate action organizations and initiatives in British Columbia. Before we get started with the meeting, we wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. So everybody, please feel free to put your own land acknowledgement into the chat, and I will just present WeCan's acknowledgement. As we gather today, we acknowledge that the land we now refer to as British Columbia has been home to diverse Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Since BC was colonized in 1858, local First Nations have faced discrimination, violence, displacement, and cultural erasure. The West Coast Climate Action Network recognizes the right of BC's Indigenous nations to assert and implement their Aboriginal title rights, treaty rights, and right of self-determination and sovereignty as peoples within their traditional territories. We aim to foster a welcoming and respectful gathering place for Indigenous climate leaders who are working on similar issues, where we can come together to build and exchange knowledge and experiences to guide us into the future. So for my part, I live and work in the territory of the Kwungan people, whose descendants include the Songhees and Esquimalt nations who continue to live and work on these lands. And I'll be putting some information about the Douglas treaties into the chat when I finish talking. And I'd be happy to discuss those further if anyone wants to reach out to me. So as we all know on this call, one of our responsibilities, both to our Indigenous hosts and to ourselves and to the rest of the world, is to minimize our impact on the land, and this includes climate change. And climate change is already having a major impact. Climate action needs to be accelerated at all levels of government, including municipal. Municipal governments do have authority and the ability to take serious climate action. WeCan and our local government team will be doing a number of things in addition to the Roundtable series. And here I'll ask Sebastian if he can mention some of the other initiatives.
Thanks, David. So we do have a couple of other initiatives in play, and we're sort of launching two of those today. I'll be posting a link in the chat shortly, but the two main ones are a sort of new information package that our team has put together to help people who are considering running in October, as well as we are sort of officially launching our Climate Champions database. So we have a form that you can go to on our website and register, sort of declaring that you're going to be running the next election and that you consider yourself a climate champion. And we'll be using that information going forward to connect candidates together in a sort of candidates forum so that folks can support each other going forward. It's usually good to talk to people who are in similar situations to you. It's a tough struggle for all of us. And then we'll also be using that information to help connect climate champions with climate action groups in their local municipalities for mutual support as makes sense. So I'll be pasting that into the chat right now. And also you can visit that site anytime you want to see exactly how many days are left until election day. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, David.
Great, thanks a lot, Sebastian. So everybody feel free to get in touch if you want to learn more about what WeCan and the local government team are doing. So we're about to get going, and I'll just sort of outline how the discussion is going to work. We'll have the introductions, and then each presenter will present for 10 minutes, each of our three presenters. Then a moderated discussion among the presenters with Andrea moderating, and participant questions. So, and then a quick wrap up. So please feel free to use the chat box to put questions for the panelists in there. And Andrea will be drawing from those questions to ask panelists questions. You can specify a panelist, or you can say it's for anybody or all three of them. And also feel free to put your own comments and opinions and have discussions in the chat as well. We will be recording the meeting and making the recording available on the weekend website afterwards. So today we're pleased to have a great panel of conversation leaders. 3 panelists. First off, Nicole Charlwood from the City of Nelson. She'll relate her personal experiences in recruiting and supporting climate champions through relationship building. Megan Curran, District of North Vancouver Councillor, will explore ways to engage potential candidates in conversations around deep structural system change, as opposed to carbon myopic conversations rooted in the status quo dominant worldview. Megan will present a systems-based tool that can spark deeper inquiry and conversation. Ned Taylor is our 3rd speaker, elected to the District of Saanich Councillor. He first ran for council when he was 18 and was elected at the age of 19. He believes firmly, as do I, that young people deserve a say in their future. He'll discuss his campaign run and how being a climate champion influenced it. And the session will be moderated by Andrea Reimer, who currently teaches at UBC and SFU. She is a former 3-term Victoria City Councillor. She works with municipal governments, nonprofits, and mission-driven local businesses on climate and social policy. So many thanks in advance to our panelists and our moderator. And Andrea, we'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Dave. Hopefully my sound holds out for the duration. So Tanzi, everyone, Tawau, Nimi Waston, Ewa Pemitan, Andrea Reimer, Nipti Casson, Maga McWitch, Ho Muskim, Squamish, Egwa Taswelatu, Kinanana Skomatin, Jackfish Lake, Treaty 6, Ochinia, Kakiao Niwa Gomakanak, hi. So good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Reimer. I am from the Jackfish Lake Métis settlement in Treaty 6 territory in central Saskatchewan. And I was giving my thanks to the Musqueam and the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh for the ability to be on their territory and work to be in right relations with them. I appreciated everyone's land acknowledgements in the chat, and Dave, I really appreciated the tone you took with yours. I would really encourage all of you when you're putting land acknowledgements, either verbally or written into the world, to think about the obligations that those acknowledgements carry. Reciprocal relationships and balance are very important concepts in Indigenous communities. So putting down an acknowledgement without an obligation puts things a little out of balance. So I would invite you in the future when you do that to think about both in one place. So it is a pleasure to join you tonight on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is how do we get more climate action champions into government? Oh, Dave, thank you. Apparently my sound is breaking up a bit. Well, let me try and get us to Nicole, and then I will work on troubleshooting my sound. So you heard the intro for Nicole. I'm not going to say much more other than I'll invite her to take the floor and speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll go to Megan and Ed and into the roundtable discussion. So Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Nice to see so many people here. Thanks for the invitation. And I'm honored to join you all. So when we were discussing tonight's plans, I was told that what you really want to know is how to identify climate-specific candidates and how do we convince folk to do a crazy thing like running for office. My quick answers, if you're practicing good relations, and Andrea spoke to some of what that might look like, then possible candidates will start to bubble to the surface. To get them to do this crazy thing, they need support in deciding to run, support during and support after the election. When I was asking folk to run for office, I was usually approaching multiple people because odds are some will say no. It is crazy after all. Eric, I hope you're here tonight. I keep quoting you. Putting people and relationships at the center of our work is key for any successful campaign and recruiting any candidate you might want to attract. I'll explore with you the importance of intentional relating and what that can look like. My background in campaigning has been largely influenced by Marshall Gantz's leadership framework, people, power, and change, and the organizing movement that it spawned. I'll drop a primer to his work into the chat after I'm done speaking and credit the work appropriately. But essentially, he defines organizing as a leadership practice based on accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. And I think that really suits our time that we find ourselves in now. So you want climate champions identified and recruited into campaign leadership. Then to build a constituency around that leadership, you need to help transform resources of that constituency into power to allow you to achieve your purpose. Gantz identifies 5 basic organizing leadership practices, and the one I will focus on is how to build intentional relationships as a foundation of purposeful collective action. He challenges us to develop an understanding of the interdependence of self, other, and collaborative action. And in other words, asking questions like, what am I called to do? What are others with whom I'm in relation called to do? What action does the world in which we live demand of us now? These are big questions, but we need to be intentional with those and with others around us if we're going to bring good quality change that we're looking for. We need in-person one-to-one relating now more than ever. There is a hunger, and it's through this direct relating that we can make the biggest gains in electoral influence, frankly. Let me give you an example, and it was fun. My statistician is in the room from the story I'm about to tell you, so I invite him to drop any corrections in the chat. But essentially, I was a relative nobody coming into the 2020 provincial election as an MLA candidate. And not only that, I wasn't nominated until 2 weeks after the writ was dropped. I had 3 weeks to campaign and directed my team to focus on one-to-one connections. We came so close that with a little more time, my team believed we would have won. The advantage I had was a decade of campaign managing and deep roots with several community groups, a school, and a political party. I easily found 90 volunteers, several of whom were well connected, and we went door knocking, followed by a letter writing email campaign to all of our contacts. And those we spoke to told 2 friends who told 2 friends, and we expected the growth was exponential from there. I had calls from several other candidates and political leaders that couldn't believe I was door knocking in a pandemic, but the weather was great, so we could social distance, wear masks outside, and not a single person was upset by it. In fact, voters were blown away by my commitment to connection. Our campaign postmortem shows that this outreach is a key reason for our strong second place finish. Looking at the polling data, Andy, I'm looking to you, we won almost every poll I door knocked with my team. And if we didn't win it, we didn't lose by much. And the elected is motivated to tackle climate. Our MLA has just been actually quite phenomenal in this regard. So I've been happy to support. You know, you lose an election, but it still has an influence on what our electeds take forward with them. So it's important work just to run. So going back to Gantz and the organizing work that built on his best practices, and in case you don't know, led to the successful election of Barack Obama. Organizing is based on relationships and creating mutual commitments to work together. And it's the process of association that makes a whole greater than the sum of its parts. Through association, we can learn to recast our individual interests as common interests, identify values we share, and envision objectives that we can use our combined resources to achieve. And because it makes us more likely to act to assert those interests, relationship building goes far beyond delivering a message, extracting a contribution, or soliciting a vote. So in this context, what are relationships? Gantz goes on to explain that relationships are rooted in shared values. We can identify values that we share by learning each other's stories, especially choice points in our life journeys. Relationships grow out of exchanges of interests and resources. Your resources can address my interests, and my resources can address your interests. Although it can sound crass to some, the key is identifying interests and resources. Organizing relationships are not simply transactional. We're not only looking for someone to meet our ask. We're looking for people to join with us in long-term learning, growth, and action. Relationships are created by commitment. An exchange becomes a relationship only when each party commits a portion of their most valuable resource to it, time. A commitment of time to the relationship gives it a future and therefore a past. In fact, the relationship itself may become a valued resource. Relationships involve constant attention and work. When nurtured over time, they become an important source of continual learning and development of the individuals and communities that make up your campaign. They're also a great source of sustaining motivation and inspiration. Intentional relationships are achieved as a result of one-to-one meetings that should lead to a foundation of local campaign teams rooted in commitments people make to each other, not simply commitment to an idea, task, or issue. I'll describe a framework developed by organizers over many years for one-to-one meetings that consists of 5 acts: attention, interest, exploration, exchange, and commitment. We have to get another's attention to conduct a one-to-one meeting. Don't be coy, be as candid as you can about your interest in the meeting, but that first you'd like to get acquainted or reconnect. There must be a purpose or a goal in setting up a one-to-one meeting. An example might be, we're looking for candidates to run in the next election, and I thought your connections could help us elect some good people. Most of the one-to-one is devoted to exploration by asking probing questions to learn the other person's values, interests, and resources, and by sharing enough of your own values, interests, and resources that it can be a reciprocal endeavor. We exchange resources in meeting, such as information sharing, support, and insight. This creates the foundation for future exchanges. And finally, a successful one-to-one meeting ends with a commitment. One, most likely to meet again. By scheduling a specific time for this meeting, you make it a real commitment. The goal of the first one-to-one is not as much getting someone to make a pledge to run for local government as it is a commitment to continuing the relationship. So back to the first question about how to attract people to the conversation. You can look to people who have run for other offices. I saw a past MP in the room who maybe would love to do some local government work now. Other directors of boards, local government is just another board, just another board. But that's someplace you can look for people. I'm glad Ned's here to speak to youth. I would like to share that I, in my municipal run, engaged a lot of youth. In fact, they ran my campaign, and city staff said they never saw so many youth show up. And I won the by-election that I ran in by 75%. So yay, go youth. And to the final question, how do we ask community leaders to do a crazy thing like getting into the political ring? I would say over many meetings, listen and have a clear offer of support, support, support. Thanks, and I'll drop the organizing framework into the chat.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole. That was really great to hear. And I had a chance to study with Gantz for a bit in Boston, and you do a good job of summarizing his key points. So
wow.
we're going to,
That's awesome.
yeah, it was an incredible experience for sure.
Nice.
So we're going to move over to Megan and hear from her. And then after Megan, we'll hear from Ned. Megan, you've got slides to share, yeah? So you'll set that up?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Thanks everyone for having me. I'm Megan Curran. My pronouns are she, her. I am a councillor in the District of North Vancouver, which is on the shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I sit tonight close to Tsleil-Waututh territory, or on the Tsleil-Waututh territory, and every day I'm on a mission to find all the remaining old growth in our community. And I really challenge myself to wonder what a world would be like if we saw all of nature as relatives instead of resources. And so I am deeply humbled by the relationships that I've been developing and learning from, and just following the lead of folks who have cared for these lands for thousands and thousands of years, and often wondering and really contemplating what these lands look like before they were colonized and what they could look like if we actually came together to build a regenerative future together. So I will share my screen. I think it always seems easier said than done. Hold on a second. I opened something else and messed it up. There we go. It's always the first time, every time.
I was saying that the one thing Zoom could really use is a button you could press that has like Jeopardy style music on it when you're waiting for your screen to come up in these moments.
Yeah, you're just like, okay. So trying to move this over. I'm going to start with a quote that is attributed to Albert Einstein. If I had an hour to spend, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. I was reflecting a lot about how in 2018, the IPCC report had just come out, and I definitely was what came out with solutions. Like I was like, here's all the solutions, and how I'm reflecting now about a better approach would be to ask better questions. Now it's not letting me advance. So some of the questions that I think are important questions to be asking right now, this is both for candidates, for ourselves. What kind of world are we creating, and what kind of world do we want to leave behind? How are global heating, mass species extinction, pollution, racism, and colonialism and inequity interconnected? Are you familiar with living systems, systems design, or complex systems thinking? Again, no judgment if you're not. These are prompts. What does system change mean to you? We see a lot of, at climate protests, we see system change, not climate change. I think it's really important to get more specific about what exactly is the system. What role should technology play today and in the future? What does sustainable mean? Are you familiar with regeneration as a concept? What does equity mean? What does Indigenous sovereignty and decolonization mean? What does justice mean? And justice for who and when? What does power and privilege mean? And this perhaps is the most important question that could be asked as the first question, but I think you might scare people off. So what is your worldview? And this is something I've really been studying a lot. So Donella Meadows is was an amazing systems thinker and talks about leverage points and ways to intervene in changing systems. And the two most power, so she has a list of 12, these, and they're in order of effectiveness. And the ones that are the most effective, one is the power to transcend paradigms. And one example or one reference I use for this is fish in water. Do they know that they're in water? I don't want to have an anthropogenic view and assume that they do or they don't. But I do think that it's the systems that we're immersed in are so pervasive, we don't even recognize them as existing. And the second leverage point is the mindset or the paradigm out of which the system, its goals, structure, rules, delays, and paradigms arise. So currently, we are in this dominant relationship with other humans and with other species. And the future must be this regenerative, symbiotic relationship that includes all species. And so going from this reductive, mechanistic view of the world where we're separated from to this holistic view of nature, in my view, is absolutely critical to moving forward. This is not new. Systems rooted in interdependence, interconnectedness, and reciprocity have existed in Indigenous cultures for millennia. And so that is where my learning and understanding comes from. So I want to challenge the very notion of sustainability and suggest why we need to move the conversation to regeneration. Sustainability, this is asking, like, so how do we move from this domination, extraction, scarcity mindset that we have into these systems rooted in interdependence, equity, and regeneration to protect health and support all life on Earth? Buckminster Fuller has this quote that always inspires me: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So I think this kind of speaks to me, the challenges that we have of being in the status quo while envisioning and building this radical new future. And as anyone who knows who's in politics or in any type of movement that's looking to transform systems, it's hard to do both. We have our feet in both worlds. So how do I propose, what are some ways that I think that we can do this work in community through place-based positive actions? There is a lot of grief right now. There is, for so many reasons of all of these intersecting crises, it is been in the works for hundreds of years. And I think that the smaller, I heard a speaker talk about the telescope and the microscope. And I think that we have to get smaller in our work. And I think Nicole spoke a lot of that about some of the community building positive actions within the smallest community. Your community could be one neighbor. That is where you could start. Second piece is through this regenerative systems-based framework. And so this is a project that I've been working on with the University of Victoria School of Public Administration. Starting from the mindset that we can no longer make decisions about what money we're spending without first considering how are we deciding, what values are informing those decisions, who's been involved, whose benefits, who's harmed, and importantly, again, what worldview underpins all of these decisions. So we need to multi-solve. There is no such thing as solving one crisis anymore. So I believe that we need to ask every single time, will this public policy, this plan, this action, will this improve equity, public health, the health of all species, not just within our community, but COVID has certainly shown us all that we are completely interconnected. The health that our health is connected to other health. Of course, there's vaccine apartheid and it's grossly inequitable, but there's no denying that our health is so connected to the health of all species. And so conversely, will anything that we do actually increase inequity, deepen public health, climate and ecological crisis? I want to propose that this is not, we have everything we need. This is not about technology. This is simply about having enough people in place to start speaking from this positive, regenerative new future that we're building. We need to follow the lead of Indigenous peoples, but the idea that we can't create these thriving communities with local energy to minimize the externalities that we send to other places, that we can't have these beautiful living buildings, that we can't have public luxuries for all, that we can't do that is frankly ridiculous. Of course we can. So this systems-based framework has a series of lenses. So people are probably familiar with a climate lens. When I first campaigned, I was like, I'm gonna put everything through a climate lens. And upon reflection, that was too carbon myopic. Like I was also working on the symptoms and not addressing sort of the root causes and not understanding how everything is so deeply interconnected and interdependent. So these prompts send us towards positive futures would be the happy smiley face. So we want to end up with more smiley faces. If we're in the middle, we're at sustainability. So sustainability, someone, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name now, but said it's doing 100% less bad. So the idea that what are we sustaining? Is it the hurricanes? Is it the racism? Like, what exactly are we sustaining here? We are in a deficit and we need to do everything, every action needs to be positive and it needs to multi-solve. So asking questions around health, equity, reconciliation, decolonization, and prosperity. And then of course, looking at emissions, not just from an operating emissions, but from life cycle emissions, considering biodiversity, land and water, pollutants, etc. So Jeremy Lent, if people are familiar with his work, he says we're heading towards this tipping point. The question is, what tipping point? Is it the collapse of Earth's life systems and civilization? I'm going to say no. I'm going to go with this one, which is the cultural tipping point, before we hit the ecological tipping point. And Mary Anais Hegler is one of my favorite climate writers, and she writes that we need a whole new world, and we, every single one of us, has the powerful role to play as a midwife in this rebirth, and that taken through this lens, we can begin to see that we are not powerless at all. Far from it, the world is not falling apart in front of our eyes so much as it is falling into our hands. What would happen if we're brave enough to catch the falling pieces? I guess one of the things that I have learned and that I can't stress more strongly is that it's not about, it is, of course, you need someone sitting at that table that represents climate justice, but it is a community movement. This is deeply profound transformation that is required upon all scales and levels, and that we have to look at it systemically, or we will just reinforce the existing harm in new bad ways. And EVs are my favorite example of something that is just reinforcing harmful oppressive systems, degenerative systems in new bad ways. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you, Megan, for that. And I'm sure that presentation will be made available to folks, but I'm not going to set too much commentary because I want to get to Ned, and then we're going to get to some questions. Ned, did you have a presentation that you're going to share, or you'll be speaking?
I don't know. I'm not nearly as organized as Megan.
No problem. I don't think many of us are, which thank goodness she's that organized. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many people in the call. My name is Ned Taylor. I'm a Saanich Councillor and a CRD Director. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm speaking to you from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and the Saanich peoples, the Sartlip, Pakwachin, Sayot, Saikum, and Malahat nations. I was elected in 2018 to Saanich Council on the CRD board. I've served in that role now for the past over 3 years. And I'm going to just talk primarily about sort of my experience running for office as a young person and as a new sort of non-established person running. And I hope that perhaps this sort of information sharing or sharing of my personal experience could be helpful to others who are considering running and help them perhaps have success in running for politics. So I first ran very soon after I graduated from high school in 2017 in a by-election. This by-election took place due to the sudden passing of late Councillor Vic Derman. And so this by-election occurred 1 year out from the general election. I ran this by-election with a budget of, I think, less than $1,000, maybe $700 or something like that, which is very, very small comparatively to most municipal election campaigns in Saanich, and especially compared to provincial or federal campaigns. It's an extremely small budget. I was able to finish 5th out of 10 candidates in that election. And I was able to, I think perhaps I got a little bit of perhaps more attention than other candidates just because of my age. It was somewhat unprecedented for someone 18 years old to be running for council. So I came out of that by-election having learned a lot and seen how the other campaigns are run, and felt that I could go into the general election perhaps with a greater chance of actually getting elected. So I ran in the 2018 general election for Saanich Council on the CRD board. I'll just maybe talk a little bit about, just rewind a little bit and sort of talk about what sort of got me interested in running in the first place. I was very interested in politics in high school. In grade 10, 11, I started getting more interested in elections that were happening. The 2015 federal election was of great interest to me. And I was able to volunteer for different political parties and elected officials in their parliamentary offices and legislative offices. And that was really exciting for me to get sort of some firsthand experience and see what it was like behind the scenes, so to speak, in politics. And then coming out of high school, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with my life. Everybody always asks you at that age, what are you going to do? What career are you going to pursue? That sort of thing. And I wasn't entirely sure, but I knew that politics was something that I was very interested in. And I felt that I was going to continue to be interested in it. It wasn't just some sort of, I guess, phase, so to speak. It was something that I was continuously sort of interested and passionate about. And so I knew that I wanted to perhaps pursue a career of some sort in politics or pursue politics in some way. I saw this by-election coming up, and I talked to Saanich staff and found out that all you needed to do to run was to get 10 nomination signatures. And so I thought, okay, well, I've got my mom, my dad, my grandma, my neighbor. I mean, it was quite easy to get 10 signatures from people. So that was good. I think that a lot of, I liked what Nicole said about having support from people for someone who's considering running. I came up with the idea myself, but I don't think I would have actually been able to go through with it if I had not had very supportive parents and friends. I did occasionally have some people who I looked up to, who I asked about the idea of running for council and advice for running an election campaign and that sort of thing. And some people would, say something along the lines of, perhaps you should go to school first, maybe work on somebody else's campaign this time, that sort of thing. And so I think that if there were perhaps just a few more people saying those sorts of things to me, it may have been enough to make me decide not to run. But support from people really made a huge difference. So I would encourage everybody, even if you're not considering running yourself, if there's people who would be open to the idea, that kind of support and encouragement really goes a long way. And so after the by-election, I finished 5th out of 10, thought I did pretty well with the size of the campaign that I had. And I went to the general election with an increased level of confidence, having learned sort of how the campaigns worked. I was able to raise in the general election. In the end, I was able to raise over $10,000 for my campaign budget, which was absolutely critical to being able to run a successful election campaign. I think that fundraising is one of the biggest barriers that people such as myself would face as someone perhaps who's not an established voice in the community already. And so I think that people need to be aware of this sort of challenge that they'll face if they are wanting to run for office. Thankfully, I was able to raise a decent amount of money. And I worked on my campaign through June to October. I door knocked practically every day. And I was able to perhaps stretch my budget a little bit further than some other candidates, because I had, for example, friends who were able to do graphic design work for free who were not professionals. So I was not required to pay them a full professional fee. That was extremely helpful. Other candidates were having to perhaps pay professional graphic designers. So I think that some, things like this, and perhaps already having a good understanding of social media, I was able to make my own website online. I think, being a younger person, those sorts of, I guess, skill sets or knowledge or connections definitely went a long way in terms of being able to, I guess, stretch my budget a little further. And that's definitely something I would hope that anybody who's young running, who has those kinds of perhaps even just minor advantages, it can definitely go a long way when you're competing against a field of more established incumbent candidates who have been known in the community for a long time. And so in the general election, I finished 3rd out of 18 candidates. So it was quite a success. I was also able to get elected to the CRD board. In Saanich, there's 2 separate ballots, one for council, one for the CRD. Saanich sends 4 councillors to the CRD board. And so if you're able to finish in the top 4 on the CRD ballot, then you're also able to be elected as a regional district director, which was something that I didn't quite expect. Just looking at my notes here. And I will just say that I think when I first ran, I had this impression that because of my age, because of my lack of experience, because I hadn't gone to post-secondary, I hadn't had that much work experience or life experience, I really felt that I was going to get a lot of people sort of challenging me on that, asking, why should I vote for you? How can I be confident that you would be capable of serving as a councillor if you're only 18, 19 years old, you haven't gone to post-secondary, that sort of thing. I really felt that that was going to be a big challenge that I was going to have to face. And I felt that I was going to have to answer a lot of questions of that nature. But to my surprise, that was not the case. The vast majority of people who I introduced myself to when I was out knocking on doors or out at events it's so great to see a young person running. That was, I can't tell you how many times I heard that comment. And it was very rare. It did happen, but it was very rare when someone would say something like, I don't think you're experienced enough, or I think that you should, you're too young to be elected. It was those kinds of comments were made to me, and I would hear some of those kinds of comments on the doorstep and elsewhere, but they were not nearly as common as the comments that were made, supportive comments, people excited to see a young person running. So I'll just say before, just sort of in closing, that if you or anybody knows of anybody who is interested in running, or if you're interested in running for council yourself, I am happy to make myself available to meet with you, perhaps even on a reoccurring basis, to perhaps give you more insight on how I was able to build my election campaign from the ground up, and how I was able to actually run a successful election campaign, and perhaps give you more detail and share more information with you. That's something that I'm doing with a couple of candidates in the Greater Victoria region, a couple of young people. I really want to use my position and my experience to help other young people get elected, because there is not enough young people in politics, and I think that we need more young people in politics, but it's a difficult thing to do, to get elected. So I hope that I can help anybody to do that. So my contact information is online, my email, my phone number. You can call or text me, and I'm certainly happy to meet with people and provide some help. So thanks very much for listening.
Amazing. Thank you, Ned. That was quite an overview from Nicole's, the theories around organizing and how change works, to Megan's sort of philosophies that we bring into government or into the work that we're doing. And then Ned, you brought us to an extremely practical place. So I appreciate that, to get us to the sort of brass tacks of what we were needing to talk about today, which is how do we recruit more climate action champions into government. So Ned, you talked a lot about why you ran and how you ran. Megan, I'm curious, like, why did you run? I mean, I think it was implied on the frameworks, but you could have, you were a very successful business person, you had a bit of a platform through that, you were doing community activism. So what did council offer you that those other platforms did not?
I'm still trying to figure that out. No, I think for a lot of people, I thought that I don't believe that the change is happening at the provincial or federal level for climate. And so, the IP, it was interesting because around the time of the election in October, right, that's when the IPCC report came out. And so I think it definitely was a consciousness shift among the public. But I said, I'm running, climate is my priority. And that was pretty unique back in 2018. Like, people weren't really running for municipal council on a climate platform, but there were other issues that were important to me. Displacement from the community. There were other things that were important, but yeah, it was definitely climate. I thought, no other level's doing it. Let's see if this level can do something.
And so is it too early to ask you if you're gonna run again?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. But I think it's not too early to ask you if you've been thinking about recruiting other climate action champions to join the District of North Vancouver Council.
Yes, and Ned, I really appreciated what you said, and I feel so strongly about having young folks be part of building their future. It's the decisions that we make impact young people way more than other people, and it's not that it's not a binary, it's not either or, but it's such a missing voice and missing perspective, and there's so much for us to learn. So I absolutely have been recruiting, but to Nicole's point, it's challenging because I guess I tried to recruit 3 people and they were like, you need to really work on your pitch, it's terrible. I was like, you should do this terrible thing. So I'm interested in hearing if you all have better tips for getting people excited about doing something that's hard.
Amazing. Okay, well, that's a good segue to you, Nicole. Can we hear your pitch when you're recruiting people for council, or like I'm a generic one? That sounds really weird because a good pitch is not generic, but sort of a level pitch that you would give people.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it earlier, I don't actually have a pitch. The pitch comes from the conversations that I've had with each individual. It's not a generic, I mean, that's kind of the point, right? It's not generic. And so you've nurtured this conversation that comes to, you know, those motivation points. And generally, there's a certain kind of person that is lured to this kind of work. And I think, you know, in my not-for-profit work, and I'm in an independent school, there's all these different environments, but it kind of, the work is the same if you've been on board work. So there's that if you've got the experience. But to the previous conversation, both Megan and Ned, thanks for your presentation too. I was really touched by it. And my municipal campaign manager's 25. I was just elected less than a year ago. And he was on my provincial campaign and studying policy. And so he ran my municipal campaign and we kicked butt, and he's now, so now it's like, okay, so you're running this time. It's only, you know, there's an election coming up in October. So I would just reinforce the idea that you've got to figure out what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, say, maybe not from a candidate side, but if climate's your goal, then it should be pretty obvious in your community who's leading in that realm, and then just be really having those conversations that will lead to the pitch, Andrea, as you asked.
Yeah, that would be how I would approach it for sure. Like relationships, which I think all three of you talked about, really are the key, right? So that the best pitch is the one that's built on the relationship that you have with people. So I always have this concept of best ask, right? Like maybe you're not a Megan, the right person to ask. I'm not saying you're the wrong person, but the right person to ask is the person who has the relationship with the potential candidate. So something to think about for those of you that are listening is if you're the person who has the relationship with the candidate, or if you are the candidate, how people, Ned, I loved your story about how people, you self-identified, but people, when you did, showed up, right? They didn't like choose to equivocate in that moment. I think that's really important too. So let's talk a bit about like the election is the sexy part that
Oh, you're breaking up, Andrea.
Everyone always talks about, and there are questions about it. But I'm very interested in hearing about your experience at the council level. Like, how is that question about council treat you? Do they treat you as less than? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Is that question to me?
Yeah, sorry, my internet got a little unstable at the end. But yes, curious to know, does being 22 matter once you're there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's probably one of the questions that I most commonly ask when going to speak to classrooms in high school or post-secondary, that sort of thing. And the short answer is yes. I think definitely people at times will treat me differently, I think, because of my age. I think that sometimes think that I'm perhaps a little bit more easily manipulative or more easily manipulated or influenced. And definitely, I think sometimes when perhaps others are, sort of lobbying you as an elected official, sometimes I've felt that that's the case. I felt that perhaps people would speak a little bit more differently to a councillor who's been there for a long time than perhaps to myself, and whether that's due to age or whatever it is, it's definitely I would say that is real. I would also say, though, that I have been quite impressed at times with how much sort of respect and whatnot that I am treated with. People, I think, oftentimes do give me the light of day and sort of treat me with the same level of respect that they would treat a more established or older voice at the table. But definitely there's both sides of the coin, and both sides of the coin are very, very much real. So I think at times it can be, I think for anyone being an elected official, it can be quite a difficult role. It can come with a lot of stress. And so I think that's something that people should be aware of. There's a lot of exciting parts of the role, and I want to get people excited about running for office and actually using the position to make change in your community. It's an extremely rewarding thing. But definitely, for people who are young or for people who are less privileged than myself, I think that there definitely needs people need to be aware of that sort of those sorts of challenges that you can face along the way.
It can be, I mean, I was elected not at 22, but at 29. But coming from a background that was very non-traditional, I'm a foster kid and was adopted and had lived on the streets for 10 years. And that was known at the time. I was the first Green Party person elected in Canada. So that, I was sort of an object of curiosity, I guess I would say. But what I found is that what people, I mean, it's a backhanded compliment, but people would be like, wow, you're so articulate. I mean, what they meant was I had incredibly low expectations of you and you spoke in a full sentence. But what I found was it gave me the ability to get way more done because people didn't see me coming, and I was able to build the collaborations and work with staff in ways that I might not have been able to if people had higher expectations of me going into it. So Nicole, you've been there the least amount of time. How is it meeting your expectations, and what were your expectations going into it?
Well, I'm enjoying this conversation because as Ned's saying, he's getting treated like that because of his age. I'm more than twice your age. And I was treated like that arriving on the scene. So it's a bit of a, to answer your question, Andrea, I did expect it. I did a lot of research. I knew a lot of people on council, but not everybody has that, those connections already developed. And so I think people do get caught off guard. I mean, we have people sitting now who are like, I'm not doing this again. I used to be like, drinking my coffee with my friends in the cafe and carving up everything. And now that I'm in here, I see how it all works and oh my God, and I can't handle it and I'm out, right? So there's a gap there, obviously, in how we what we expect of our elected representatives, as well as when we get elected. I strongly recommend that people encourage folk to run who aren't single issue. So I don't consider climate a single issue, but I agree with Megan that until a few years ago, nobody was running on a climate platform. And in local government, you can, because you only need to get elected in the top 6 or whatever it is for your municipality. So the strategy is a little different, and you can be more focused on your goals as an elected, as long as if you can place yourself sort of in the pool of what's needed from the whole team of electeds that are getting elected together. So I like Municipal. I don't think I knew how much I liked it until I got into it and realized this is the most democratic option we have in our country right now, is being elected to municipal government. And the expectation on this level of government is so incredibly high, especially when we just apply that climate lens, and we all know there's not nearly enough money to meet all that demand. So to be on the ground helping solve, like, literally the grassroots stuff is pretty exciting and motivating for me.
Yeah, no, I hear that in your voice. It's exciting to listen to. I would say, like, I appreciate, like, Nelson and District of North Vancouver and Saanich are 3 very different places, and there's people listening from as far away as Newmarket, Aurora, and people all over BC listening. I will say I was elected in 2002 on a climate platform, so that was 20 years ago, and re-elected 3 more times after that. So I feel like I hear you, and yet I also feel like you can overcome it. And I have seen some comments in the chat from people talking about Robin says, find a climate group in your area. They would be so glad to have you join them, right? So this idea around the GANTS organizing model, right? As you say, in local government, someone was talking about a ward system. In a ward system, it would be very hard for climate activists to get elected. Whereas when you can pull your constituency from across a broader area, it's possible, right? Even 20 years ago, it was possible. So Megan, you got in there on an action-oriented agenda. Then you hit the wall of, fiscal constraint and your colleagues and jurisdictional authorities and all sorts of things. How have you been finding it? And you've had a pretty substantial win around the building code. So I'd love to hear how did that happen? Like, was that the first thing you tried, or was it an iteration after you tried other things? And what can you share with people about their expectations? If they run for office and get elected, what can they get done?
Well, I think the first thing is that you can get so much done. And one huge learning is that it's the staff. I think we probably all learned that the relationship, it really is the relationship. So in the beginning, even though I tried to explain like a climate, it's not that everything I do is climate. It's that it's how I do everything is through this lens of climate and trying to, and it was like, so you're the climate, and I was like, no, it's a way that I look at policy. And now now the District of North Vancouver has a climate lens and an equity lens, and it's like, oh, okay, so it's not just about climate; it's about how you look at everything through systems. And I think that I have found support we have a conservative mayor, we have a very like lots of different folks on council, but most of the climate policies have gone forward unanimously. And I think that there's a momentum to Vancouver certainly helps us. A lot of the work that you did has informed, even though it's a unicorn charter, as I always call it, because I'll have a lot of people being like, can you do this cool thing that Vancouver's doing? I'm like, oh, did I tell you about their unicorn charter? Like, we can't do what they're doing because they have this special charter. But working with developers and working with people and being like, you cannot tell me you can't do this. You're doing it across the bridge. And so it became this thing where they're just like, okay. And everyone kind of was just like, this is happening. Like, I'm like, this is happening. Like, you can't deny it anymore. And getting the three North Shore municipalities, District of West Van, and the City of North Vancouver to all move together, more or less, I think just is we need a lot more of that. So, but for me, a lot of the policy that you put into place, we're part of putting that policy into place many decades ago, is what enables me to do what I do now. And so I think that learning through Climate Caucus, if you all know, I am the chair of the steering committee at Climate Caucus, and having those relationships with other councillors that are like, how did you get through this gnarly meeting? What were your talking points around this contentious issue? How did you build support in the community? And I see some folks on the call who are in our community, and it is not about me. It is about like an entire community coming together to support this change, and to showing up to council meetings, to talking about things. And so it really is a collective effort, and it has to be sustained. I think it's a fallacy to say, let's elect people. It's like, no, it's like a supportive infrastructure that needs to be built around the candidates, because it is hard when you're driving change. Like, the status quo doesn't like change. So yeah, so I think it is those relationships that are really important. Yeah, I don't know, our staff is still surprised. They're like, I don't know how this happened. And I'm like, well, let's just move on then to the next hard thing.
Yeah, no, I hear that a lot. So let's talk about that supportive infrastructure though, Megan. So there's, you mentioned Climate Caucus, and Rick is the guest on the next roundtable on March 16th. So I don't want to steal his talk, but can you talk a bit about what Climate Caucus is and how it supports locally elected officials?
Yeah, it's a network of nonpartisan local elected climate leaders. There's 480 plus now people, every province and territory. And we were people who said, we're going to try to make change in our community. Grace Lee Boggs has that beautiful quote about the best thing I ever did was stay put, and like working in your community at the local level. And so we create, we share resources, we share connection. We do that through calls, we do lobbying. We've been able to drive change at the provincial level and at the federal level on building code, because it is powerful to have a lot of local electeds coming together to say, like, our constituents, which are also your constituents, right? Same electorate, actually want these changes. But again, we've talked so much about relationships. I mean, it really truly is about that support. Being able to call someone and say, wow, this is going to be hard tomorrow night. Do you have any tips for me? I think we just need way more of that to really support each other. And then to have motions, like, you don't even know what to do. Like, you're like, I can pass a bylaw. How do I pass a bylaw? And so having pre motions that are already written that you can then apply in your municipality is really important to do. And we need to be moving, at speed and scale. So one way is the theory of change, right? Like it's many local governments moving collectively together.
Yeah, a great point. Thank you for introing Climate Caucus. I'll also give a shout out to the BC Municipal Climate Leadership Council, which started up 12 years ago. I was one of the founders back in the day when we had a BC Liberal government here and not a lot of support provincially for climate policy. So it started up to primarily lobby at the provincial level. It was a ragtag band at the time, but it really was part of why we got the carbon tax and kept it, and some of the other scale ups came through that network, which was really helpful. So Ned, I want to bring you in around the supportive infrastructure question, because you've talked about this this self-organizing coalition that's come together behind you. So when they were really helpful in the election, but can you talk a bit about how that supportive infrastructure comes into play in elected office? Like how can people support you in getting policy through once you're elected?
Yeah, really good question. It's really, really critical for me to have support from people in the community if I want to get something done on council. I find that when I bring forward a motion and there's lots of people in the community who have written to council in support of that motion, or there's people also coming and speaking at public input, whether it's in person or virtually or otherwise, it really makes a huge, huge difference in terms of, I think, the likeliness for some of the initiatives that I'm bringing forward to get support. And so I would say that, I have relationships with lots of local nonprofit organizations or advocacy groups, and keeping in touch with those folks and letting them know when I'm bringing motions forward to council that are perhaps on issues that we agree upon is really, really goes a long way. And I think that part of the reason I've been able to actually bring things forward and get things passed, because the only way you can actually get something done on council is to get a majority of council to agree with you and in order to actually get something passed. So that community support and those kinds of relationships and connections really, really goes a long way. It also, I would say that being able to have connections with other municipal elected officials and other municipalities really goes a long way. Just asking other elected officials about if they can share with them, with perhaps myself, other initiatives that they've brought forward, being able to see how they're able to do that, the wording of their motions, the reports that they've brought along with them, it really goes a long way. And when you can see another municipality doing something, it's a lot easier to make the argument to your council that it's something that we should do as well. And it's also a lot easier to perhaps put together a motion and a report and all that sort of thing when you have someone else's example to take note from. So I think that those kinds of connections and whatnot go a really long way. And I think that without those, I would not have been able to get nearly as much done on council as I have.
Great points. So Nicole, there's been a couple questions that have come up in the chat from a couple different angles, but it's the same basic root cause. So you elect progressives, 1, 2, a majority, however many you get in, but then they don't do the thing that you were hoping they would do. So one of the key reasons for this, in my experience, is that the municipal government doesn't have jurisdictional authority. So you end up in this really rock and hard place position where you've got a huge community push to do something. You as a councillor can't actually do that thing. You might be able to do something, but not the thing, because municipal government authorities are pretty narrow. So how have you been managing that? Like, how have the expectations of the community been, and how are your other councillors? Are they trying to council-splain you, or are you like, where's the balance there?
Yeah, even those that were supposedly in my camp were pretty condescending when I joined. So it was an interesting start. You know, you think there's a camp you belong to, but at the council table, from my experience, it's been every motion is different, and there is no predicting. And there was quite a firm hold on no kind of backroom talk. People were really trying to hold that. But being the newbie, I've been really able to kind of leverage that a bit and, you know, claim ignorance and all of that. But at the end of the day, in terms, you know, I was elected also on a climate platform, and there was, for example, a lot of expectation that, you know, we make a lot of declarations at the city. So whether it was old growth or even a climate emergency, you know, those kinds of declarations, there's a lot of them that we get asked to do. And I thought I would bring a couple of those, and started the process, and discovered that council, you know, at year such and such had decided no more proclamations.
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
So that had to I really had to change my framing. And I actually, in the end, was pretty grateful for it, because I'm not here to do more proclamations. Like, who needs another proclamation? We need, you know, we need action. So I felt guilty for a split second for not being able to follow through on commitments I had made. But communication goes a long way. And to follow up with those, I know I had made those commitments to, and said, you know what, listen, I didn't realize that there was this block. So when I said I would do this, I couldn't, but here's what I'm doing instead. And so thank you to Climate Caucus, for example, on old growth. There's an opportunity there for me to help advocate, but not ask my council to make any proclamations. So that's maybe an example of what you're talking about, Andrea.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example of it. I mean, I think there's a time and place for proclamations for sure, but I do think people don't elect you to proclaim, they elect you to make change. So sometimes the proclamations can leverage change, good idea, but if it's instead of tangible change, I think that's where it can be challenging. I know Maureen just had a comment in the chat about support for, how about recruiting and supporting candidates that believe in models of community involvement like citizens assembly? The system has to change, not just the ideology of the candidate. So it's such a great example. I wasn't a single issue candidate. I was very big on climate, but I also did a lot of work on engagement along with reconciliation and some other issues, and really wanted to do a citizens assembly. But then of course, municipalities don't have access to the voters list. So the only ones we could pull from were property owners, which actually retrenches existing inequities that we were trying to deal with by having a citizens assembly. So sometimes it's not as simple as wanting to do it and being able to do it at the municipal level can be two totally different things. So we're here in an election year, and the window for making policy happen is getting a little smaller, and the window for getting elections going is getting a little bigger. So when is it too late to decide you're going to run? Like, where are we at in the life cycle? Megan, obviously it's not too late because you haven't decided one way or the other yet. But if somebody's listening on this call and thinking about running for office, what is the timeline in their head about when they should be committed to doing it and then launching and getting that campaign going if the election's in October? And Nicole, Ned, Megan's jumping in. There we go. Megan.
Well, I was just going to say that I put my name in at 4 o'clock and it was due at 5 o'clock on the last day. And I did no plastic signs because, you know, I'm anti-petrochemical industry. And so it was a very last minute thing. But now, as you've mentioned, the timelines are so much longer. So I'm interested in hearing what other far better organized candidates have to say. But I do think that it could be up until the last minute. Like, I believe it's possible because I did it, that you just decide at the last minute that you're just going to give it a go. It is a short period anyway, right, of the actual, but there's certainly people in our community campaigning now. So, and in the big city of Vancouver, lots of people have declared. So yeah, what do you all think? Who actually, I need to learn a lot from Ned and Nicole about organizing.
I can speak to that. I mean, for my election campaign, I think decided in the by-election, I decided probably around July that I was running and started working on my campaign then, approaching a September election. But then immediately after that by-election, started preparing for my election campaign from then on, from September all the way to December. Didn't work on the election campaign from December until June, and then from June until October the next year, worked basically full-time on the campaign. I would say that for someone considering running in the upcoming municipal October election, I would say the sooner the better. The sooner you can start fundraising and preparing your campaign, the better. But I've heard from other elected officials and other people considering running, perhaps you wouldn't want to maybe leave it too late past June to run if you want to be able to fundraise and actually build a really strong campaign and not be stretched for time. I think that might be the latest that you'd want to leave it, but certainly if you leave it later than that, I'd certainly still rather see lots of climate leaders run than not run. But that would be my thoughts on that.
Nicole, any thoughts?
I would just add that if you're considering, or you know somebody considering, perhaps the next question is, could you call everybody you know and ask what they think? Because generally, if there's somebody who's well connected and they're really considering it, you're getting other people to do your work for you, number one, by encouraging them to do it because, ooh, they'd be so awesome. And then you circle back with them after a period of time and say, did you reach out? Like, because that builds confidence. And so then you could apply at the last minute. If you're doing this background work, you don't have to be registered as a candidate to be calling people. And if you get somebody who's enthusiastic, a quick pause to say, ooh, so when I need money, will you be available to help with that? Yes. Okay, thanks, I'll be in touch. And you don't need to get full commitments, but that's how I would deal with it. If I were considering, I'd just start reaching out to my network and see if people thought it was a good idea, if I felt I had the time to do it.
Such great points. So like Andy's got a question, Andy Shadrack, in the chat about voter coalitions, a concept I used to train people on in the Green Party, actually, about how you build a voter coalition. So some of the vote comes from your party, if you've got a party that you're allied with, but a lot of it's going to have to come for you. And in local elections, that's especially true, right? So, I was a soccer player, so some of my vote came from other soccer players. I was a mom, so some of ironically not a soccer mom, my kid wasn't as into soccer, but I got votes from preschools and childcare that I was organizing with. I got climate voters. So who are your voter coalition? Like, who you're bringing to the table? Because I think, Nicole, to your point, the more chunks of a voter coalition you're bringing to the table, the less time you need, right? Then you can actually put your name in at the deadline and stand a good shot at it. So Ned, who was there for you? I'm guessing young folks, climate activists, but were there other chunks of like them as wedges sort of in a circle in your voter coalition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I got a lot of support from a lot of different people. I got pretty broad levels of support when I ran. Definitely, I was involved in my local community association. So people in my own community association knew me better than perhaps in other areas. And I got perhaps a little bit more support from them. That's definitely a great way if you're thinking about running for council. It's a great way to get involved in your community and to sort of build those networks. I was also involved with political parties, primarily the Green Party, before getting elected. So support from people there definitely went a long way. But I also got lots of support from people who support other parties, such as the NDP or what have you. And so I think I was able to run a pretty strong campaign. I was able to, I think, get support from a lot of people across the community. So it wasn't necessarily one group or of people within the community that was really behind me. I was more of a broad level of support, and definitely being able to have a decent sized budget and enough resources to run that kind of campaign was critical. So.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. Megan, what was your, oh, someone's asking what a community association is. So I put a brief, like a very generic definition in the chat, Ned, but can you speak specifically to your community association?
Yeah, so I guess difficult for me to describe a community association and perhaps just a simple definition, but for example, in Saanich, we have, I think, 15 community associations. They each represent different areas of the community, so different neighborhoods. So for example, we have a Cadbra Bay Community Association, a Cordova Bay Community Association, a Gordon Heads Community Association. Sometimes they're called residence associations. And they're sort of local neighborhood associations for people to get involved in their community. For example, my community association, the Mount Tulmy Community Association, organized yoga in the park and different events in the summer and things like that. They also have a bit of a role in terms of providing feedback to council on development applications within their community. And so oftentimes they will sort of provide a letter or a sort of a formal submission to council on the community association's input on a development application. And that's very common. And so it's also very common historically in Saanich for people who want to get elected to council to get involved in their community association first, get onto the board of directors, and then go from there to running and getting elected to council. And I think that they're pretty commonly found in other municipalities too, not just Saanich. I know that City of Victoria has, for example, the James Bay Community Association or that sort of thing. So,
yeah, excellent, thank you. And it's actually a great like springboard to talk a bit about that, right? So there's community associations, there's library boards, there's volunteer fire departments. On the school side of the municipal election, there's parent advisory councils. You've got community associations. You may also have a community center or recreation center structure in your community, and that may be a place that you can get involved. Police boards, and then business improvement associations or chambers of commerce are another common place that people come to local government through. So Megan, how many of those were on your list when you put your name on the ballot at 459 on election day or nomination day?
Well, I think you mentioned that I operated small businesses in my community for a long time. So that's, you just meet a lot of folks through that work. And so I think and I had been working in climate activism, so certainly connections to other groups as well, but like definitely just was completely winging it, had no idea, no idea what I was doing. But I think now I look at like all the organizations that are doing work, whether it's social service providers, people who are doing local gardening initiatives. Like there's so many people who are doing cool work in the community that you kind of, I think, can connect with. And it might be, in some of the environmental movements, people have found unlikely allies with like hunters. I'm not using that as an example in the District of North Vancouver so much, but where it's like you find maybe unlikely allies around common issues, I guess, or common concerns.
Yeah, dog walkers, field sports users, like these are all, if not huge, very organized parts of local government constituencies. And the other thing to consider is most local government elections are decided by a minority of voters because so few people vote in them. So it's really about the idea of a voter coalition, who is motivated enough to show up and vote is a very key one. So I'm realizing we're getting towards the end here. So I might throw one last question to you all. And that is the magic wand question. If you could change one thing about the local government that you're elected to in the next term, let's just assume you're going to be there next term, what would it be? Is it staff? Is it who else is at the council table? Is it that constituency of active residents out there? While you're thinking about it, I will give my brief pitch of what I'm on a lifelong journey on this, but I think if I had to change one thing about the whole structure, it's the idea that you somehow need to be an expert to be elected. Like you really only need to be an expert in your local community. And that just involves living there. That's it. and some level of self-awareness and observation, but it's not a high bar. And I think there's been a huge move away from that, this idea that somehow, I think because we hear people on Twitter or crashing around in the media having these like what sound like informed, but if you're in government, a lot of them are actually not as informed as they're confidently trying to sound, debates that somehow you need to hold your own. There you don't. You just need to be able to hold your own in the expertise of being a member of your community. So I hope people feel that their passion and their understanding of their community is more than enough to be an effective local representative and to consider whether to run based on that. Maybe we'll go backwards this time from the order we started with. So we'll do Ned, Megan, and then Nicole.
This is a pretty surprisingly difficult question. I mean, there's so many things I would love to change about my community and my and the municipality of Saanich. I mean, I can start with the way that our community is built in terms of our roads and our infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure for cyclists, for pedestrians, and for transit users. I mean, all these sorts of things. If I had a magic wand, I would make many changes, but so it's difficult to choose one thing. I will say that one of my biggest frustrations in Saanich is it is a very, I think, sort of more perhaps status quo and slow moving municipality comparatively to some other municipalities. And there's a lot of great people who work for Saanich, but I think that kind of culture in Saanich does make it difficult for me sometimes as an elected official, and for perhaps some of the more progressive and ambitious members of our council to make big changes within the municipality and the community. So that's definitely something that I would, if I had a magic wand, I would like to change, because it's not a simple thing to change. It's a very deeply rooted, I think, culture that has existed for some time. And so that's perhaps one example of, if I was able to just have a magic wand and easily change a big thing like that, that would perhaps be it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ned. Megan, and then Nicole.
Just asking the easy questions tonight. Yeah, I mean, just kind of reflecting back on what I'm learning, it is this worldview, like this deep, profound change that has to happen, and it's about changing hearts and minds, and it's about seeing ourselves as positive regenerators of life, and that sounds, but it's like what is needed is what is necessary. And so, I think some people are asking in the chat, like, how do you hold people accountable? And I think that the challenge is that if people do support people when they get elected, there's not an overwhelming push for change and transformation. And so it's easy for the status quo to maintain itself, right? Like, it is the entrenched power system. And so getting people engaged in completely new ways and intergenerationally, and getting young people to be engaged with other people, because there is just this is all about connections, right? It's connection to the land, and it's connections to each other, and what kind of community do we want to be part of, and getting people engaged, because as you mentioned, voter turnout, we've had 15% voter turnout in our municipality. Getting people engaged, not just at election time, but as part of this transformation that we need to go through as a society. And I want to surprise ourselves. I want to be surprised about how much we can do.
I love that. That is a great use of a magic wand by both of you. Nicole.
Thanks, Megan. That I'd like to just stand with you and wave mine with you, both of you, actually. For me, I saw the accountability piece question jump up, and I do have to admit that that's something that I've been motivated to try to change at our current council. We have some senior management changeover stuff happening, and we're like, hey, well, how did we hire for this role historically? They're like, oh, they liked me, they just interviewed me, and I came, and I kind of feel that way too, like being elected, just I was liked more than the other options because it was a by-election, you only get one, and there was only one seat, And then I show up and people are like, oh, you don't need to be on any committees. We got it covered. Just sit pretty. That's sort of, who am I accountable to? So it does feel like, and is something that I'm working on. We've got some opportunities to discuss how, we've got these big ambitious needs and goals. People need to feel attached to those goals and be held accountable for them, both ourselves and our staff. So that, yeah, I'll bite the accountability bullet.
I love it. I was suggesting in the chat, the accountability has come up so often, and it's such a big issue to grapple with. I mean, there's who's a good candidate, who's a good elected official, and then this question of an accountability structure. And they're three fairly separate topics, which I tried to delineate. But Dave, I'm hoping, and I'm going to turn it back over to you in a second, but I'm hoping that we'll think about doing a webinar just on that. I know I said the last thing I said earlier was the last thing I'm going to say, but the very last thing I'll say, I was trying to find the stat for it, but my memory was in the last local government election, almost 10% of the local government officials in the province and many of the mayors were elected by acclamation, which means they were elected because they were the only person that stood on the ballot. Nobody opposed them. So to Megan's point, if it's 4:59 on nomination day and you still haven't made up your mind and there's no one else running, just put your name on the ballot, because at the least, I mean, accountability starts with open public debate. Hopefully today's debate and dialogue has left you thinking about maybe making that decision a little sooner, or if not you, how you'll support people that are those people. And thank you everyone for joining us. Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you to say thank you to our guests today.
Always have to find that unmute button. Thanks very much, Andrea, and thanks to all three of our panelists, Nicole, Megan, and Ned. And great job, all four of you, for sharing your time, expertise, and experiences today. I'd also offer our thanks, weekend's thanks to all the participants for your time and expertise and contributions in the comments and in the chat, and for making it worthwhile to put this on. If you have any thanks or parting messages for us, please do throw them into the chat. Just a reminder that this is one of a series, and the next one coming is on March 16th at 7 p.m. called Perspectives from Inside Local Government. So we'll have three elected officials who will share their experiences on the challenges and urgency of prioritizing the climate agenda. For details, you can look at our website, and that's in the chat. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, ideas, if you want to volunteer, if you want to connect with somebody in your community who might be running, or if you're a candidate and you want to connect with your local nonprofits, please get in touch with WeCan. On behalf of the group and the local government committee, thank you all again. Stay healthy. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.